Hello, everyone. I'm Emily Walker with the U.S. Embassy Algiers, and you're watching Let's Chat, a show on American culture brought to you by the American Cultural Center Algiers. The American Cultural Center Algiers is located inside of the U.S. Embassy, and it's a gathering space, library, and also a place to practice English. Unfortunately, we're still closed because of COVID, so instead we're doing live talks like this one. But there are 4 other American cultural centers in Algeria, one in Constantine, Oran, Wergala, and Bashar, and those are open. I encourage you to pay one of those spaces a visit if you live nearby. I actually just visited the American Corner Constantine last week, which is located in the Frère Montouri University. They're doing some really cool programs there, including an upcoming spelling bee. In fact, all of the 5 spaces are hosting regional spelling bees on Saturday, November 20th. The winners of which will travel, all expenses paid, to Algiers to compete in an Algerian national spelling bee. So if you're a great speller, I must admit I'm a terrible speller, but if you're a great speller, you should stay tuned for more information on how to enter our spelling bee. So today on Let's Chat, we're talking about women's participation in politics in America. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Susannah Welford. Susannah is the founder of Running Start, which is a non-partisan organization that trains a diverse group of young women to run for political office in the United States. She's based in Washington, D.C., but she's traveled all around the world, sharing her experience encouraging women to run for office. In fact, she traveled to Algeria in 2015, so feel free to ask her questions about her experience in Algeria. And you can ask her any other questions about women's involvement in politics, or really anything you want in the YouTube chat, and we will ask Susannah your questions. So Susannah, over to you. And if I can start by asking, why did you start an organization devoted to women running for political office?
Well, first, Emily, thank you so much for having me today. I'm sure you all know this is my absolute favorite topic, talking about women in politics and why women around the world need to think about running for office and assuming leadership. So I want to just start by just telling you two experiences that I've had in speaking to groups of women in the United States, but also all around the world, because I've had 2 common experiences that I think show exactly why I needed to start an organization like Running Start. And the first is, so when I'm speaking to groups of women, I frequently get a question, which is, why are you trying to get more women into politics in America? Don't we have enough? I mean, we had Hillary Clinton run for president. We have Kamala Harris as vice president right now, and Nancy Pelosi is the most powerful woman in the House. And why do we need to do this? And I'm going to tell you several times today that, oh boy, we absolutely are nowhere near equal in the number of women and men in politics and power in the United States, or frankly, in almost anywhere in the world. We have a Congress right now, which is our highest legislative body, that is 73% men. And so I always have to take a deep breath when somebody asks me the question of, don't we already have enough women? And then the other thing that I started doing in speaking to groups of women, which has been so fascinating, is I ask groups of women a question when I first start speaking. And usually I'm doing these in person, and I'll ask people to raise their hands if they think that the world would be a better place if we had more women running it. And in every group that I've been in, every hand in the room goes up. I think people understand why it's so important to have more women in power. But then I follow that up with a second question. And the second question is, okay, so who in this room is going to run for office themselves? And you probably could guess what the answer is, that when I ask that second question, all the hands stay down. Every once in a while, somebody will raise their hand, but for the most part, people say, we need more women in power. Women are good leaders. Women are going to bring real change to problems that have long been unsolvable, but I don't want it to be me. And so that Emily is why I founded Running Start and decided to devote the last 20 years of my life to inspiring and encouraging young women to think of themselves as powerful women who can run for political office at the highest levels. So, and now can I tell you a little bit about the history of women in America? Because as Emily said, I've been to Algeria. I had such a great visit there, and learned a little bit about the political system in Algeria. And I realized that you all might not know so much about the political sort of the history of women in power in the US. So I'm going to speed through things. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about where women come from in power in the US, and then what the current numbers are. And then I want to spend the majority of the time telling you about my efforts with Running Start to encourage young women to see themselves as powerful and to run for office. So, so really, I mean, the first thing that I think is interesting when we talk about women in politics in America is we just had a really big anniversary that was very celebrated. So in 2020, it marked 100 years of women having the right to vote in America. And probably the same in Algeria. When you have a milestone like that, there are big headlines and, you know, everybody's like, wow, we've come so far. And to me, that anniversary was a little bit difficult to celebrate for two reasons. One is that when women got the right to vote in 1920, it was a result of a really bitter fight. And interestingly, I never learned about this fight as a student. In no history course did I hear the story of how women got the right to vote, but it involved this group of determined women who ended up getting arrested and thrown in jail, and they were sometimes held in solitary confinement in jail. They had a hunger strike. They were force-fed. It was very violent. And it's so interesting that, you know, in none of my schooling did we ever even mention the fact that women had to fight really hard to get this right. The second thing, which is interesting, is that even though women got the right to vote legally, Black women couldn't vote for almost 40 years after that anniversary, until the Voting Rights Act in 1960. So it's, you know, it's a little bit of a fraught anniversary. And so in 2020, we had that.
If I could also chime in there, completely agree with everything you said, how it was fraught. And the 100th anniversary was a good time to look back at the history. One thing that I was very kind of disgusted with was seeing the tactics that people used that back then to prevent women from being involved. And it's tactics that sometimes we see still today. For instance, people calling women stupid or silly, or why are you out here doing this? Don't you have a family to raise? Those kind of things really were said a lot 100 years ago by people in power and by everyday people.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. And when you say that happens still today, there are examples, you know, just from the recent election of women running who have families and being told you should be home with your families and not running for office. And there was an incident. So Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, one of our Democratic senators, you know, the highest level you can basically get in US politics, she took time out of her Senate term to have a baby. And there were constituents calling for her, you know, some of the people in her district calling for her to give back her salary because she was taking time out to have a baby. So I think that you're absolutely right, Emily. There are so many barriers that still exist for women today in gaining power, and as you said, even in voting. And you know, in terms of big anniversaries, another anniversary, or not anniversary, but another big milestone that was so celebrated back in 2020 was the fact that America got more women elected to politics than ever before in history. And we had lots of different types of women being elected. A lot of the women who were running were women of color. They tended to be much younger than people who had run in the past. As I just said, many of them were mothers, including Katie Porter, who's a woman who ran out of California, and she's a single mother. And she ran for office and she won, and then got a lot of criticism for, who's going to take care of your children back in California when you're in Washington, D.C. voting. But we got people like Katie Porter elected. We had people from different professions like teachers and bartenders and nurses elected. And all of that is so exciting, and it's such great news, and it's all moving in the right direction. But still, as I said in the beginning, our highest body of government, Congress, it's still 73% male, and it's 77% white. And it is still a fight to get women to want to run for office and then to get them elected.
So what does your organization do to convince women that maybe they should run for office?
Well, I want to answer that in like a roundabout way by saying, when I first started to be aware of the fact that there weren't enough women in office, and to really believe that getting more women in office would solve so many of the big problems we have in American society, but also globally, I came across some research, and this research was done by these two professors at Brown University. And the research looked at professional women and men who were in their 50s, like lawyers and doctors and administrators. And it asked them, would you run for office? And if so, what would you run for? And if not, why would you not run? And I remember reading this research, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head, because most of the men said, yeah, I'd run for office. And if I ran for office, I would like to run for senator or congressman, which are, of course, some of the highest offices, maybe president. And for the women who said that they'd like to run, they chose offices that were much lower, much more local. But the most illuminating thing was when they asked, why do women, ask the women, why don't you want to run for office? The main thing they said is, we don't feel qualified to run. And that was so startling and terrible for me to realize, that all of these women who they're so talented, they're at the tops of their professions, and yet they don't feel like they are qualified to lead people, to be in politics. And so what Running Start does is takes, if women who are in their 40s and 50s, like women my age, don't feel qualified, I thought, well, what if you start with high school and college age women, really young women, and you build up their confidence, you build up their skills, you get them to the point where they know they do have what it takes, that they are qualified. And the idea is that Running Start is creating this big pipeline of young women who are going to go on, and they're going to run for office, and they're going to change everything for the better.
Mm-hmm. Could you share with us any stories of how this has actually happened in real life, when you've maybe approached someone who you saw potential and maybe they ended up running for a political office?
Yeah, well, let me tell you two stories. And first, I just want to say, Running Start has kind of a cute way to remember what we do in our trainings, which is we have 3 C's. We give the students who come to us, we help them to develop their confidence. We help them to develop their capabilities, like their skills in things like public speaking and messaging and raising money and networking. And then the last thing is we connect them to people who can help them to get on that path to power. So yeah, I'll tell you 2 stories, because these are 2 of my favorite stories about Running Start, and these young women are so amazing. So the first is this woman named Alison Carpenter, and she went to Howard University, which is a university in Washington, D.C., and she was walking to class one morning, or maybe let's just say, because I don't want to think she skipped class, let's say her classes were finished. She was in the halls and she saw a sign that said free donuts. And she went in to go get a free donut because she'd skipped breakfast, and it was a Running Start training. So Running Start we do 3 types of trainings. One goes,
lures people in with donuts. I see.
We lure people in with donuts because we are smart, Emily. That's what we do. But so we do one program is 4 months long, one program is a week long, and then our smallest one is a day long. So Alison wandered in to get a free donut at our day-long program, and she stayed because she said she'd never heard anybody talking about the need for women to be empowered, the fact that women, we already possess the power, we already possess the skills, we need to step up and to take that power. And so the speaker that day was talking about, we always do exercises where people have to practice, they have to stand up and give a public speech, they have to create a message. And at the end of the day, what the speaker was asking the crowd to do was to think about running for student government, because student government in colleges around America, it's, even though there are more women than men in colleges, the student governments tend to be dominated by men. So the speaker was saying, go out there, run for student government. And Alison, she later told me this story. She said she walked out of there feeling so inspired. Like, for the first time in her life, somebody had said, I believe in you. You can do this. You have solutions and power that you need to bring to solve problems in your community. So she actually went out and she ran for local office. She was 17 years old. She was a really young college student, and she ran for local office in Washington, D.C., and she got elected as the youngest advisory neighborhood commissioner ever. And then she actually went on, after she finished her term, she went back and she ran for student body president at Howard University, and she won that too. But to me, the reason it's a good story is there's so many people who could be such good leaders, who could help to bring such needed change, but nobody's ever told them that they can do it. Nobody's ever said, I see you as a leader. I see you as somebody who can lead people and help to change things. And I love that she goes in for a free donut and she walks out and she becomes a candidate. So I have other stories, but maybe I can save those a little bit later.
Okay, well, that was a great story that, as you said, really speaks to that often we just need someone when we're young, and really at any age, to just kind of say, I see you and I see potential in you, and that kind of sets you on your way.
Yeah, no, that is definitely true.
We have some comments in the YouTube chat. Well, there's a civil yet heated discussion going on about religion in the YouTube chat actually right now. And I'm wondering maybe if you can speak to what role, if any, religion plays in US politics. Is it a big deal? Does it matter? What are your thoughts on that?
Now I think maybe I should tell another story. So religion, of course, plays a role in how people see their potential for running for office and whether they can get elected for office. Most of the, I think I said that most of the people who are serving in political office in the United States are old and they're white and they're male. And they also, people don't talk about this as much, but they also tend to be one religion. They tend to be Christian. And so when somebody from a different religion runs for office, it's a big deal and it's very commented on. We now have several Muslim legislators in Congress, and it's something that it made it more difficult for them to run for office, because the assumption is always, if you're going to run for office, you're old and white and male. And when you're something different, they're barriers. But we had a young woman back in 2009 go through our program. Her name is Rana Abdelhamid, and she won our campaign simulation. So this is in our high school program. It's a really diverse group of women from all over America. and they come together. And anyway, out of 100 people, she won the campaign simulation. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, Rana, you're such a superstar. Are you going to run for office? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, well, I could never run for office. I'm Muslim and I wear the hijab. There's nobody who looks like me in American politics. And so I'll work behind the scenes, but I'm not going to run for office. I can't. And so I said to her, and other people from Running Start said to her, if you don't run for office now because of the fact that nobody looks like you, then nobody who looks like you will ever be in office. And so she took that to heart, and I was happy to get an email from her a year later saying, Susannah, guess what? I ran for student body. I guess maybe it was class president. She'd just gone to college, and she said she's the only woman, and she's the only Muslim, the only person wearing a headscarf. There weren't even that many on campus, and she won. And my favorite thing about that story about Rana, well, two things. One is, here it is, 2021, and she's running for Congress in Astoria, New York, in Queens, New York, which is just so exciting. So, this girl who, when she was 17, told me I could never do it. Now she is running for the highest office almost in the country. But then the other thing is that, Rana, by running and deciding to run, she has broken down the barrier for so many other people like her. And so people will look at her running for office right now and they'll say, well, I can do that too, because Rana's doing it, which I think is so important.
Yeah, I think that representation is, seeing someone who looks like you is so important in every single field. I mean, this is just extremely important in life in general. Right. Here in Algeria, women are actually very overrepresented in university. Most university students are women.
Same here.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it still doesn't necessarily translate into jobs.
Right.
Even though a lot of university women are women, they're not necessarily getting these jobs either in politics or in math and science fields or anything. So I think just seeing someone who looks like you, for instance, we actually recently featured a woman who works in the oil industry here in Algeria. Algeria has a big oil industry, which I'm sure you know since you've been here. Yeah. And she works drilling for oil in the oil fields, and it's mostly men doing that work. So she spoke about, that she would go to these oil fields and be basically the only woman there. And I know her going around Algeria and speaking about her experience has inspired a lot of young women who are studying math and science to be like, oh, she looks like me. I could have this job that I didn't think of before. So sorry to go on a tangent there, but it's just so important to see someone who looks like you. It really helps you set your goals and achieve them.
Yeah, and really, we early on with Running Start realized that if we brought in young elected women to come speak to the students, that was the best thing we could do. So, even if we unfortunately have never had the chance to have somebody as high up as Hillary Clinton come speak to our students, but really, it's the younger political candidates and the younger elected women who are the most inspirational to our students, because they look like them, they can see the path, they understand, more where they're coming from. And it looks more attainable when you can say, oh my gosh, that woman is 10 years older than I am, and she did it, so I could do it too.
Okay, and it sounds like in your experience, you've seen women who are Muslim and Muslims in general, men who are Muslim as well, succeed in U.S. politics when they run.
Well, yes. And I think that I'm right that Keith Ellison was the first Muslim man to win a seat in Congress. But we have Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are extremely exciting and popular members of Congress who are both Muslim. And I'm 100% certain that we're going to have many more. If I can go back to the religion just for 1 second, I'm just thinking, it's always difficult to step into the spotlight if you have been told your whole life that your place is out of the spotlight. Instead of running for office, you're supposed to be in the home raising children. I'd actually love to talk about that question later, because I'm such a big believer in women should not have to choose. They can do both of those things very well. But that conversation reminded me that in New York, and I cannot remember what position, but I think it's a local position. There's an Orthodox Jewish woman who is running for office, and there are no pictures of her allowed, and it's been extremely controversial in her community, because it's not a community that frequently sees women step up into positions of power. But I really think there is a way that nobody should say power is not for me, leadership is not for me, people like me don't do this, because often it's those voices that we need the most. It's the voices where they have never been elevated, they've never had the chance to speak about their life experience. Those are the people who really change politics, and change society for the better.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, so you do trainings for women, who are interested in being in politics or think they might be interested in being in politics. Can you give us some of your tips that you give to the women to kind of, what do you tell them? Like, what is there a public speaking tip that you have, or how to present yourself and present your ideas?
Yeah, I would be so happy to talk about tips. And so the training comes from, I think that our training method comes a lot from experiences that I've had in my life, and that the other trainers have had in their life. And I say that because I think sometimes when you see somebody doing public speaking, you look at them and you think, I could never do that. That person is so polished and they look so confident. And really, as I learned probably too late in life, most of the people who you see up on that stage, who you think are so polished and so perfect, inside, they have every doubt that you have. They have all of the insecurities, they have all of the nervousness and the anxiety, but they have figured out how to go ahead despite it. And so I think that's one of our biggest tips, is not like, when you do public speaking, you need to put your shoulders back and stand up straight. It's less the technical aspects and so much more the psychological aspects of, we tell ourselves sometimes, I'm not going to be accepted, I'm not going to do a good job at this, people like me don't stand up in public and speak. And it's sometimes a matter of getting over those hurdles to get you to the place where you feel like you can do it. And I seem to have lots of stories, so I want to tell you one more story about a student who went through our program maybe 10 years ago. Everybody has to stand up and speak. So if you're in our programs, you can't just say, I'm going to sit in the corner and watch. Everybody has to stand up and participate. And so this woman was asked to stand up and give a speech of some sort. And afterwards she disappeared. And I asked, she did a fine job. And I asked somebody, where did Maya go? And they said, oh, you might want to go check on her. She's in the hall and she doesn't look good. So I went in the hall and she was having a panic attack. She was white and she was sweating and she was shaking. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, I can't do public speaking. I was so nervous and it made me feel so anxious that I wasn't doing it well. And I think everybody thought I was terrible. And anyway, I spent a long time calming her down and telling her she was okay and that it was all right. And I was proud of her for doing it. And then later that day, I realized that on our agenda for the next morning, some students were chosen to have a much bigger speaking role. So we had a conference that next morning where we brought in outsiders. So we had 300 outsiders in the audience. And Maya was one of the students who we had pre-chosen to stand on stage and give the speech again. And I went up to her as soon as I realized this and I said, listen, you do not need to give the speech. It's okay. Like, I saw how hard that was for you. And she said to me, she's like, I've been talking to some of the other Running Start trainers, and they told me that if I don't get up there and do this speech, that it's never going to get easier, that this is going to be the thing that I tell myself, like, I can't do this. And she somehow got up on that stage and she gave such an incredible, moving speech. And, the whole audience erupted in applause. And to me, that's one of the biggest things that we do is we help the students get over those barriers that say, I can't do this thing. And so I don't know, Emily, if you were asking like, well, tell me some tips on how to give an effective speech. And really, like, the biggest things we do is we get people to stand up no matter how nervous they are and to say something. And then the second thing that we do is we encourage them to really speak from the heart, to bring themselves into what they're talking about, and to be as authentic and real as they can. Because when we see politicians or CEOs stand up and talk so frequently, you feel like they are just reading from something. Like it's so wooden and it's not real, and you don't get a sense of who they are. And I want the people who I vote for I want to know who they are. I want to believe in them. I want to connect with them. And so that's really, those are the biggest things that we do in our trainings, is we work with them on how to connect with the audience, how to be real, and then we help them get over those hurdles that tell them, I could never do this.
I think there's a fear sometimes, speaking of being real, I'm just gonna take my giant cat and get him off the table there since he won't stop running across. I think there's a kind of a fear when people are public speaking, especially in a setting where they want to appear very, very professional and respectable, that they think if they tell specific stories about themselves or reveal something, maybe a funny story, a personal story, that they'll look unprofessional. I see that even with Algerians I meet here, who I've met a lot, who are really into public speaking and into debate. And I always tell them, just as a person who is a storyteller and who likes hearing stories, that a specific story, specificity, a very specific story, like you just told a couple specific stories about people you met and panic attack and the face was white. So I always say, like, a specific story is good, not just a generality, like I was so nervous, but like a really, really specific story really humanizes a person, and it makes for a good public speaking.
Well, and I totally agree with you, Emily, but I want to just bring up something. It's not controversial, but it's the counterpoint to that, which is, a few years ago, I was on a panel with a diverse group of women, and I'm sure I said something like what you just said about, like, you need to share something about yourself and be vulnerable and show who you are. And this woman said, with great clarity, she said, as a Black woman, the standard for me is different. That as a Black woman, I need to be even more professional. I need to be even more upright and controlled and a better speaker. And she said, I'm not sure that standard works for everybody. And that has caused me to think so much about that. I think that there's some real truth in that needs to be a counterpoint. And interestingly, when I was in Algeria, I spoke to this group of activists, and I was actually doing a training on messaging and public speaking. And so I said this point, bring yourself to it, be authentic, tell stories. And somebody in the audience said, I don't think it's professional for me to allow people to see who I am as a person, because I'm not who they expect to see as a spokesperson. I'm not who they expect to see as a leader. And so I need to put on this more powerful facade. And I bring that up because I really believe that what you and I said about connecting with the audience and being real, I think that is how you gain people to your side. That is how you have impact. But I think we have to keep in the back of our minds that it's not easy. It's not as easy for everybody to do that.
Yeah, very good point.
Excuse me.
We have a question on YouTube from Marion Caramel, who wants to know how to deal with the fear of getting older and the pressure to do everything now and then settle and have a family.
Oh, well, wait. So is the pressure, I can't tell how old she is. Wait, is she saying when does she have a family?
I think that it might be kind of asking to do everything now and then settle and start your family. And I would guess that you think you don't have to do everything and then start your family, that you probably could do them simultaneously, but I'll let you address that.
Yeah, I mean, that is such an important thing to talk about. It's such a great question, because even when I'm talking to very young girls, they worry about that. So I had a student who was maybe 13 say to me the other day, I really want to run for office because people in my community need my voice. They need somebody like me to help solve their problems, but it makes me sad because I've always wanted to have children. And I was just, it strikes such a chord in me, because to me, the very best person to represent me is somebody who has children and who has had that experience of trying to balance work and family. And she'll know more about my life. When I was working a very busy job at a law firm, I had twins, and I could talk for maybe 2 hours about that experience of having twins while working for a busy law firm. But I left that, that experience in my life. In some ways, that is what really was the beginning catalyst for the work that I'm doing now, because I felt so much all of the how difficult it was for a woman to stay in the workforce, to do an important job, or certainly to be a leader and to have children. But that's who I want in office. And so I say to, I can't remember her name, Miriam, that there has been some great research, and there are lots of great books written on this subject of, you can do everything. You can do it at the same time. You will work really hard. You may feel always that you're not giving your best to everything at the same time, but the most inspirational leaders that I know are the people who decide, I'm going to live life on my own terms, and I'm going to figure out a way to make it happen. And I worry that you might think that sounds like it's too easy, like, oh, just do it. It's not coming from a place of it being too easy. I think running for office, even having leadership jobs, it's so difficult. No matter who you are, whether you're single or whether you have children or whether you are taking care of an elderly parent, it's really, really difficult. But the women who I know who are doing the best things tend to be those women who are doing lots of things all at the same time. They take on a lot, and they are the ones who bring all of their life experience to politics. So anyway, it's obvious what I think. I think that you should have your family now and figure out the best ways to make your ambitions work around that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that response. And we've touched on this a bit, but in case our Algerian audience doesn't know about this, there is kind of a phenomenon in the US where if women and men are maybe say on a panel or something and they're discussing their job, the woman will sometimes get asked, how do you have kids and do this and have a job? And then they don't ask the man on the panel the same question, when presumably, the man also might have kids, and a question maybe that, could be asked to everyone or asked to no one. But I'm curious, do you see this a lot? I mean, you're there dealing with this issue all the time, Susannah. Do you see women get unfairly asked that question?
Oh, Of course I do. And, we talked earlier a little bit about how women running for Congress with children that becomes a talking point for their opposition. Like, how can she really lead us when she has these other responsibilities of children? Um, I do think that in America, things are shifting. I think that there are many more households where you have stay-at-home dads or you have parents who are splitting the burden of raising the children. But that is going to be a huge cultural change, not just in America, but everywhere. This idea of equality, real equality between women and men. And somebody earlier was talking about religion. Clearly, lots of religions make that an even more fraught conversation, a difficult conversation, because different religions prioritize having women be stay at home. So we are a work in progress. And I think, if you go back 100 years and you think about where women were then versus where they are now, we've made huge amount of progress in not such a long amount of time. And yeah, I feel really hopeful that when I have a daughter and a son, that when they grow up, it is going to be different. And the expectations of who does what is going to be different. And my real hope is that women and men around the world are going to realize and start prioritizing getting more women into power, because they'll realize that's the way that we get stronger societies. That's the way that we are able to have truly representative government that addresses everybody's needs. So I think right now, most women understand why it's important to diversify leadership. But I think there are too many men who don't really understand why it's not just a fair thing, it's the right thing to do to get more women into leadership.
Thanks for that. We have a question that just came in from Nasima Bin Yusi, who asks, who do you see as an idol woman in politics in the USA?
There's too many. So I'll tell you one, because you probably haven't really heard about her. Let me just think if she's my choice. I want to tell you about two. Hopefully she'll let me have two. One is a woman in Congress, and wow, oh my gosh. And then my mind's like, but what about her? Okay, so maybe I'll have three. One is a woman in Congress named Lauren Underwood. She won a seat in Congress now I'm just trying to remember, I think it was 2016. But she is an African-American woman. She's the first Black woman to win in her district. And she was previously a nurse. And she ran for Congress and she won. And I'll tell you one of the reasons she's my hero. She is a Running Start graduate. So she went to one of our programs, which makes me very excited. But the other reason is we invited her to speak to our high school students. And, after she won her race in Congress, and so many times when you have a member of Congress come to speak, they have lots of staff with them and they're very dressed up and they just look untouchable, almost like extremely powerful. And Lauren Underwood, Congresswoman Underwood, showed up wearing a Black dress and a Black backpack and flats and nobody with her. And she just looked so approachable, and she looked, and the way that she spoke to the students was so approachable and so real. She's like, I'm a nurse. I saw that there were lots of problems happening in my district and nobody was solving them. And so I thought, why not? I'd been to training programs like Running Start. She went to other ones too. And she's like, I'm going to do it. And so to me, like, that's my favorite model. I love when somebody can show up and be really real, even though they're in power. And my other two, just really quickly, are the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel. She started at the lowest level of Congress. When she ran for mayor, nobody said she could win. I remember debating friends of mine. They're like, oh, she'll never win. And I love that she won and she's doing great things. And then the third one is not a politician. It is this woman named Sarah Minkara. And if you don't know her, you should look her up. She is originally from Lebanon. She has been blind since age 7, and she runs an organization called ETI, Empowerment Through Integration. And she does workshops to bring disparate people together and to get them to find connections with each other. So I love women who are trying to solve problems and make the world a better place.
Oh, I will look her up. She does
Yeah,
sound
she's really good.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we need to wrap up, so maybe I'll just ask you one more question. You focus on, women in politics in the United States. That is the title of this talk. But most of the people watching right now on YouTube are in Algeria. So I'm wondering how does this advice apply to people in other countries?
Well, I think the beautiful thing about Running Start's training is, even though we primarily focus on American women, the lessons are absolutely universal and global. Because what we're telling people is, if nobody like you has ever been in power, if nobody has ever encouraged you to be in power, if you doubt yourself and say, well, how could I do it? What Running Start tells you is, you can do it. Nobody is born a leader. There is not one type of leader who is the leader. And that the people who decide to do that difficult thing of leading, whether it's, it could be leading a community group, it could be leading a school group, it could be leading, at the highest levels of your country. But the people who step up to do that, who come from identities and communities where people like them don't run for office, those are the people who are going to have the biggest impact. And so that message is, you can do this. You have the power already. You have it inside you. It's just about bringing it out and bringing out all of those ideas you have about what needs to change. Like, how could things be done in a better way? What does your life experience tell you about how things should work, and what solutions are to problems? It's bringing that knowledge out and running for a position of leadership and working to change the world. So that's what I want. I want everybody to think they can do it.
End it there with changing the world. I think that's a great spot, a good inspirational message, and something that really can happen, I believe. So thank you so much, Susannah Welford, founder of Running Start. I dropped a link to her organization in the YouTube chat, so I encourage everyone to check that out. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you don't already, so you won't miss talks like this. We do them most Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Susannah.
Thank you,
Have
Emily.
a great evening.
Thank you, everybody.